When we discuss the WWF's great tag team division of the late 80s, it's a shame that the Rougeau brothers don't get talked about as much as others. Jacques and Raymond Rougeau were not only extremely capable professional wrestlers, but their heel work within the WWF was actually fantastic. The unfortunate thing about the Rougeaus was that their time as a tag team was just too short. So let's take some time to give the brothers their fair dues as we look at the Fabulous Rougeaus in the World Wrestling Federation. Real-life brothers Jacques and Raymond were born in Montreal, Quebec, with Raymond being the older brother by around 5 years. Their father, Jacques Rougeau Sr., was a professional wrestler who began working in the business during the mid-50s. Jacques would train Raymond and Jacques Jr. to become professional wrestlers, but what many don't know is that Jacques Sr. also trained his other son, Armand, to also become a professional wrestler. Armand was even signed to the WWF in 1986, but 1 month before his debut, he sustained a serious back injury that forced him into retirement. Raymond made his pro debut in 1971 at the age of 16, working here for his father's promotion in Montreal. In the mid-70s, he relocated to Atlanta, Georgia to work for Jim Barnett in the NWA. Jacques started a little later, naturally, making his debut in 1977 while working for Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling in Calgary. Jacques would also work in the United States during the 80s before making his way to the WWF along with his older brother. Before we get to the WWF, let's go back a little and look at the international wrestling promotion in Montreal. The Rougeaus had been cornerstones of this promotion, operating here for 7 years from 1980 to 1987, and along with Stampede and Maple Leaf Wrestling, international wrestling was one of the 3 biggest Canadian wrestling promotions during the early 80s. When the 80s wrestling boom period came to the United States, the WWF benefited greatly by getting superstars such as Rick Martel, Dino Bravo and the Rougeaus from international wrestling in Canada. Before this though, Vince McMahon had tried to expand into Canada by purchasing Maple Leaf Wrestling and Stampede Wrestling, but he was unable to outright buy international wrestling. Instead, the WWF and International Wrestling were able to come to an agreement where they would run special co-promotional shows. It's been speculated that Vince McMahon only done this so he could expose his superstars to Montreal audiences, gaining a foothold in the area with his larger-than-life wrestlers. There's much more to this story though, and we will look into the WWF Quebec invasion in further detail in the future, but in short, McMahon was eventually able to lure international wrestling's top stars over to the WWF, and one of the first teams to jump was the Rougeau brothers. Before this though, Raymond and Jacques had some well received matches against Jimmy and Ronnie Garvin in Quebec, with the last match between the two teams happening at the first ever WWF and International Wrestling co-produced show. International Wrestling was a promotion that Vince McMahon was never able to buy. Their tape library is one of the few not owned by WWE, and even if the WWE did want to acquire the footage, the master tapes no longer exist. International wrestling footage only exists today due to fans of the promotion recording shows on VHS. So aside from the co-promotional shows, the first match we have for the Rougeaus after they signed with the WWF was on the 28th of February 1986, where they defeated the Moondogs on Primetime Wrestling. Interestingly, their WWF debut match was in Australia. As you can see here, during their initial months in the World Wrestling Federation, they went undefeated for quite some time. The Rougeau brothers were booked as clean-cut babyfaces here, getting a ton of wins against the likes of the Hart Foundation, the Dream Team and the Funk Brothers. The winning streak wouldn't last long. They were defeated in their first WrestleMania match at Mania 3 by the Dream Team, but this was by no means the end of their impressive win record. Raymond and Jacques were extremely successful in house shows, and they were kept relatively protected on TV. The WWF ran a house show in Montreal on August 10th, 1987, a show that featured a tag team match pitting champions the Hart Foundation against the Rougeaus. In this match, Raymond and Jacques won the tag titles. Jimmy Hart had tried to interfere in the match in order for the Hart Foundation to score a win, but the Rougeaus ended up using Jimmy's megaphone to score the win and the titles. The brothers were announced as the new tag team champions in the middle of the ring, but in the end, the decision was reversed and the championships went back to the Hart Foundation. The WWF does not recognise the Rougeaus as tag team champions. The Rougeaus would continue to work as babyfaces in the months that followed, being featured on a regular basis on the house show loop, but as time went on, the wins would become less frequent. In July of 1988, Raymond and Jacques had a match against the Killer Bees, another babyface team in the WWF at the time. When the Rougeaus cheated to get the win, the fans booed. When the Rougeaus offered to shake the Killer Bees' hands after the match, the fans booed even louder. The Rougeaus were turned heel, and it would turn out to be the right move for the brothers from Montreal. The clean-cut babyface thing just wasn't working out for Raymond and Jacques, no matter how many wins they were given on shows. Jimmy Hart would end up managing the team, and they changed their name to the Fabulous Rougeaus. Heel tag teams were aplenty during this era of the WWF, so the Fabulous Rougeau Brothers would need to think outside the box and try something different. It was decided that the brothers would act as pro-American as possible, coming to the ring with little American flags and starting USA chants with the crowd. Jacques Rougeau said, "Vince gave us an opportunity to be good guys and come into the WWF as the Rougeaus, the same way we had worked in Quebec. There isn't a country more patriotic than America, and in those days, Americans may not have been keen on having Canadian heroes, they wanted American heroes. For us to come in and become heroes in the States was something we wanted, but the American people didn't want it. Vince approached us about becoming villains. The way he approached it was that we would be billed from Memphis, we would become Americans, and we would mix up dates such as Independence Day and Thanksgiving, things like that. He knew people would be pissed off with us, and it worked well." Their theme song too, the instant classic All-American Boys, needs to be heard to be fully appreciated. So just like my Marcus Bagwell video where I asked you guys to stop the video and go check out American Males, do yourselves a favour, take a break from this video right now and go and check out the Fabulous Rougeaus All-American Boys. The link is in this video description. The theme song is so bad that it's actually great. In the song, the Rougeaus state they don't like heavy metal, but they love Barry Manilow, and they prefer the preppy look over having long hair. It's so ridiculous, but it fit in really well with what the Rougeaus were trying to come across as. The song also has a section in French, and during this part of the song, the Rougeaus actually make fun of America, so it's just really funny that they would add this little sly jab in a different language while continuing to sing about how they are all American boys. It's great stuff. Shortly after their heel turn, the Fabulous Rougeaus had a confrontation with the Dynamite Kid, Tom Billington. I talked about this already in my Dynamite Kid video, but it does need brought up here again if we are to talk about the careers of the Fabulous Rougeaus. The British Bulldogs and the Rougeaus had real life heat backstage. Even though they didn't tangle that much in the ring, Gene Okerlund once called it one of the most intense WWF rivalries he had ever seen that never took place inside the squared circle. The Bulldogs were scheduled to lose to the Fabulous Rougeaus at the very first SummerSlam in 1988. It's been reported that Davey Boy and the Dynamite Kid voiced their concerns about losing to the Rougeaus in the SummerSlam opening contest, and they managed to get the finish changed to a time limit draw. The match went on without any issues, there was no real heat yet, but you can see here that the Bulldogs were not willing to put the Rougeaus over. Jacques felt that the heat began during a house show in September when the Rougeaus asked if they could switch their match time slot with the Bulldogs time slot in order to spend another night at home with their families. The Rougeaus wanted their match to go on first so they could leave the arena early. The Bulldogs agreed, but Jacques said that Dynamite wasn't happy about the request. When Jacques went to get his bags to go home, he noticed that some of his items were missing. He instantly believed the Bulldogs were responsible, but in reality, it was actually the king of backstage ribbing, Mr. Perfect, Curt Hennig. Just a few days later, Jacques requested that Curt keep an eye on his bags while he performed, which of course just meant that Curt would mess around with the Rougeaus even more by cutting their clothes up and putting a lock on Jacques' bag. Jacques apparently announced he was going to Vince McMahon about the whole situation, still believing it was Dynamite Kid who was pulling these pranks. This led to a backstage fight between Jacques and Dynamite, which was eventually broke up by Raymond. It's been reported also that Dynamite got a cheap shot into Raymond after he broke up the fight. Vince got word of the backstage brawl and announced that the next person who starts a fight in his locker room will be fired. In the meantime, Jacques would become obsessed with getting back at the Dynamite Kid. On October 5th, 1988, Jacques did indeed get his revenge. Backstage, Jacques punched Tom Billington with a roll of quarters, knocking out 4 of his teeth. This apparently led to Dynamite's backstage image of being a tough guy getting seriously tarnished, and eventually, the Bulldogs gave in their notice. I'm going to include a link in the description for you guys to check out that goes into incredible detail regarding the incident, along with video links of Raymond and Jacques telling their side of the story. I recommend checking that link out if you want a full breakdown of the events. But anyway, the Bulldogs' last match in the WWF, coincidentally enough, also featured the Rougeaus in a 20-man Survivor Series match, and it's been said that the Hart Foundation eliminated the Rougeaus early in the showdown so that the Rougeaus could pack their bags and leave before the Bulldogs got backstage. The WWF were doing everything they could here to avoid another fight. The Fabulous Rougeaus then went on to feud with the Rockers, Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels, leading to some of the most well-received tag matches of the late 80s in the WWF. The Rougeaus and the Rockers had the very first 1-hour marathon matches within the World Wrestling Federation, and as mentioned in my Rockers video, these appear to be the first matches ever billed in the WWF as 1-hour long showdowns. Of course, there had been 60-minute matches in the past, but these were the first tag team Iron Man matches ever advertised in the WWF as such, and on top of this, the matches were extremely well received. The only problem is, hunting down these matches has become more difficult as time has gone on. These 60-minute matches only took place at house shows, and while the Rockers and the Rougeaus had great matches on TV, none of the 1-hour matches were ever broadcasted during this time period. In total, there were 7 60-minute matches between the Rockers and the Rougeaus between August and November of 1989, and along with this, the two teams would also work a few 2 out of 3 falls matches that were also well received. A few of these house show matches were shown on Primetime Wrestling, and there are a few available on the WWE Network. However, none of the Iron Man matches are available in their entirety. If anyone has any leads on these matches, please let me know. Due to a history of back issues, Raymond was forced into retirement in 1990. The last WWF match we have recorded for the Rougeaus as a tag team was on March 3rd, 1990, when the Rockers defeated the Fabulous Rougeaus in New Orleans. Before this, the Rougeau Brothers had taken a loss to the Bushwhackers at the 1990 Royal Rumble. Raymond would move into a broadcasting role within the WWF, doing some backstage interviews before moving on to a hosting job for the WWF's French television shows. Jacques was eventually repackaged as the Mountie when he came back to the WWF in 1991, going on to eventually become a short-lived Intercontinental Champion, and also continuing on to form the Quebecers tag team with current Ring of Honor World Champion PCO. Jacques would officially retire in 2018 after closing his wrestling school. Raymond Rougeau is a French commentator to this very day for World Wrestling Entertainment. The heel version of the Rougeau Brothers, I feel, could have been so much more if it wasn't for the untimely in-ring retirement of Raymond Rougeau. I believe that the World Wrestling Federation knew that Raymond's days were limited, hence the losses on TV to the likes of the Bushwhackers, but the exciting 1 hour long matches on house shows with Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels. The whole pro-American thing that Jacques and Raymond had going on was really good in my opinion. They took the tired old evil foreigner gimmick and turned it into something with comedic tones, which worked extremely well. Along with this, both Raymond and Jacques were good inside the ring, and even better when paired together, so it's a shame that the Fabulous Rougeaus in the WWF was cut kinda short. Nonetheless, they helped establish the WWF's excellent tag team division of the late 80s and became an asset to the company while also standing up to a locker room bully, sending him home with his tail between his legs. All in all, I liked the Fabulous Rougeaus, and also I feel they do deserve a spot in the WWE's Hall of Fame.